Hi everyone. So today I'm going to show you about the Geek Wisdom Grid View object. So you can use this object when you want to load a table dynamically from a JSON string and you want to be able to have pagination and sorting all happening within JavaScript. What makes this tool unique is that it allows you to access the table as an object in JavaScript and it doesn't require any knowledge of jQuery. In order to be able to follow along in this tutorial, I assume you have some knowledge of HTML and a little bit of knowledge of JavaScript. You don't need to have a lot, but I'll show you how it works. So the first thing we're going to do is create the very simple start of an Hello World HTML file. So all I'm going to put in this HTML file is your basic tags for HTML and your body tag and then just a Hello World. So that's just a very quick stub to get things working. So we'll see this little hello world, and then I'll show it to you in the browser, and you can see that it's just a very simple page. So we'll start with the hello world. So let's expand on that a little bit and let's make a copy of that Hello World HTML file and we'll call it tabledemo.html. Make sure I spell Hello World correctly, helloworld.html. Now let's take a look at it. And let's make a few small little changes. So the first thing we're going to do is obviously change the header to something like Geek Wisdom Table Demo. And let's add a little title on the page so that it shows up a little nicer. So we'll just add a little head tag there. And we'll put in a title. Geek Wisdom Table Demo Tutorial. Oh, not much fancy going on here. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab the Geek Wisdom JavaScript tools from the GW site of GitHub. So I'm going to Geek Wisdom GitHub GW site and I'm going to go under releases and I'm going to scroll down until we see the gwjstools.zip and we'll download that version of the JavaScript Geek Wisdom tools, which includes a lot of tools including a web UI, a data object, a settings object. And I'm going to unzip them into the folder so that I have access to all those objects. So for this particular tutorial, I'm only going to be focused on the Geek Wisdom Grid View object. So let's go back into the tabledemo.html file. And let's add a reference to include that JavaScript source. So I'm just going to add a little script line here that includes the Geek Wisdom Web UI Grid View scripts, so you can see it there, scripts or Geek Wisdom GW Grid View. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some settings. So what I'm adding here is the layout, and in your layout array I need to bind each of the data fields to the title that's going to be in that table. So when my table is built, it's going to have fields in my array, so there'll be a field, for example, called date added. And the actual text that will show as the column header will be date space added. For example, there'll also be a field called quote, and it'll have a header text of quote with a capital Q. I'm also going to define the width for each of these fields. So you see I have 200 pixels for the middle, so it'll be bigger in the middle and a little bit smaller on either end. So that's an array which is we're going to set up to describe what those different fields are and how they're going to be bound to the table. And to actually do the table, I'm creating this function called load table here. And you can see that I'm going to take that settings object, grid1 layout, and I'm going to apply that to the table. And I'm also going to read the array of quotes from a JSON string. And I'll show you that string later. Now, of course, to actually bind the table itself to the JSON array, we call ogridviewDataTable, and we assign the DT quotes array. So that's how the array happens. And then to actually display it, you call the display page method of the grid view. Now, the actual data in the table, we need to actually have JSON that we load. So I'm going to put this in its own file called quote data. And I'm just going to create a simple array to store the data and 3 little objects to store some quotes. So you see we have the quote array, quote row 1, quote row 2, and quote row 3. So you can see I then create an ID called 1, and I create a page, and I'm going to create the actual wording of the quote, the date that I added the quote, and then I'm going to push that quote into the quote array. So let's do another one. Just add it in there, just one sec. So there's number 2, so that's my second quote. It also has a quote text, a date added, and we'll just clean it up a little bit there to make sure it's all in one line. And let's just add a third quote. So now I have an array that I'm going to convert to JSON of 3 different quotes, and you can see that the page, the quote, and the date added are those same fields that I bound earlier to say what the headers would be of each of those table columns. So I set I set quote, and I set date added to have a capital Q and date added to have a space. You'll notice that I didn't bind the page, and we'll see a little bit why that is later. It's not going to actually show up in the table. Let's go back into the table demo, and let's make sure we add a link to that actual JavaScript file. So quote data.javascript. So now it'll include both the array and, of course, the grid view control. We also want to set a callback function. So the callback function for the grid view is called getSelectedRow, and it takes in a row and a row ID. So this happens when the user clicks on an item in the row. What do we want to have happen? So you can see in this function, all that's going to happen is when they click on that row, we're going to look up that item in our JSON array, and we're just going to display an alert to the user of what that particular page was. So remember, that table, when it's built, isn't going to have a column called page because we didn't bind that column to our table, but it's still in the array and we can still search it and find it. So when they click on it, we can show this was the page or the element page in that array. So basically, when this is all said and done, we're just going to have a table with those same rows that were in our JSON field, and when you click on it, it's going to show the name of the variable page, which contains a page. And maybe in further versions we redirect that page, or we show that page in an iframe, something like that. So there we have it. We have the layout screen that's going to show us what the different fields are that are bound. We have the JSON included of what the quote data is. And if we just go and show you now, viewing what that page looks like, we'll see a table. Now the table isn't very fancy, it doesn't have any lines, and you can even see a little bit that it's not centered on the top, but if I do click on a row, you'll see that that page shows up in an alert box based on the quote that I signed. So it's functionally working. We might want to fancy it up a little bit so that it looks a little nicer and that things are aligned a little better. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a little bit of styling with CSS just to make it look a little better. So let's go back into that file. And let's add a style attribute. Now, the way the Geek Wisdom Grid View control works is that there's specific styles that it's going to create. One is called the Geek Wisdom Grid Table, and in this case, that's the entire table style. So we're going to set a different font family, and we're going to set the border around it to be solid, and we're going to have it have a radius so that it looks a little pretty. A couple of other style elements are the grid row. So every single row is going to have a style of GW grid row. So when we set attributes like that, like the height and the vertical line and the padding, that's going to become part of every row of the table. So in this case, we have a bottom border, a little bit of a radius, a top border, and some padding to make it a little more space, and we're aligning the text to the left, and that's part of, as you'll see, to help align what all those rows look like. Let's add a few more. GW Grid View Select, so that's just going to show what the column looks like when it's selected. We'll add one for when it's hovering, so that it changes color as you bring your mouse over it. It'll show it in a different color. And let's add something for the every second row. So we want it maybe every second row to be a little bit of a different color. So we'll add the nth child attribute, and we'll change the background a little bit to an off bluish color there. So now when you've made those changes, you can see now it looks aligned a little better, and as I move the mouse along, you can see it highlighting in a different color, so you know what highlighted is for the user, can identify what they're about to click on, and when they click on it again, it still functions the way it is. And one of the nice advantages of this is it's done entirely in JavaScript. It doesn't require any jQuery. You can use it in any language you want. It'll still work. Okay, time to test how much you're paying attention. There are actually two errors I made when I did this video, and I kind of hid them from your view. The first error was in the original HTML file. I bound the JSON to the file quotes data, but later I created the variable and I called it quote data. So that generated a little error with the extra S. So I fixed that, but then I didn't show you in the video. Did you catch it? And the second one is that when I actually extracted the files from the zip file, I extracted them into an org directory, but when I included it in the script source, I put scripts/org. So in order to fix that, I had to create a scripts directory and move that org directory into that scripts directory. So if you're a really keen geek, you caught those two little bloopers. Good job.
Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this article are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of my employer. Examples of analysts and code used within this presentation are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real-world products, as they should be considered as based on limit and possibly dated open source information. Assumptions made within this presentation are not reflective of the position of any private or government entity to which the author is presently employed.
Geek Wisdom.